Sorry, I was on mute. So so this is the revenue deficit. Revenue deficit, like I said, is the excess of revenue expenditure over the revenue receipt. So this is simple to understand. This has got nothing to do with the capital account, only the day-to-day revenue expenditure and receipt. Okay, so this is about the government's day-to-day accounts. The second is fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is the excess of total expenditure over total receipts. So total expenditure would mean the capital and the revenue receipts, and the total expenditure would mean the capital expenditure and the revenue expenditure. The total receipt would mean capital receipt and revenue receipt. Now, one thing we exclude from this is borrowings. So you may ask, why are we excluding borrowings? Because when you include borrowings, borrowings will match the receipt and expenditure. Okay. If you exclude borrowings, then borrowings show you the gap between receipt and expenditure. So borrowings basically tell you what is the deficit. Okay. So that is why we don't include the borrowings of the government. So when you don't include borrowings and then you see what is the excess of expenditure over receipt, that gives you the fiscal deficit, which is basically the deficit of the government, full deficit of the government. The last is primary deficit. Primary deficit is that you have a certain fiscal deficit. Okay, so let's say fiscal deficit is 10 lakh crore. No, let's not say 10 lakh crore. Let's say fiscal deficit is 1 lakh crore. So 1 lakh crore. Okay, that's the fiscal deficit. What is the primary deficit? Now, out of this fiscal deficit, I will subtract the interest payments. Why interest payments? Because sometimes what happens is that governments borrow money just to pay the interest on the past loans. All right. So why am I borrowing money? I am borrowing money to pay interest on the past loans. Okay. So that means that my entire deficit is only because I had taken so many loans in the past. Okay. So if you take fiscal deficit and you subtract from it interest payments, let's say the primary deficit comes as 0. What is the meaning of 0 primary deficit? That all your borrowings is because of the past interest payments. Okay. So that is what primary deficit tells us, that out of my fiscal deficit, if I reduce it by past interest payments, then what is my new deficit this year? All right. So that is the primary deficit.